Uh,
So now we're going to study chapter 4. Okay.
Okay, well, we got to find the beginning.
Oh, where's the beginning? There it is. It's coming up. It's a long chapter. Oh, but you're going to have fun with it. Chapter 4.
Hi, Chapter 4. The sun rose upon a tranquil world and beamed down upon the peaceful village like a benediction. Breakfast over, Aunt Polly had family worship. It began with a prayer built from the ground up, a solid curves of scriptural equations welded together with a thin mortar of originality. And from the summit of this she delivered a grim chapter of the Mosaic law as from Sinai. Then Tom girded up his loins, so to speak, and went to work to get his verses. Sid had earned his lessons before. Tom bet all his energies to memorizing of 5 verses, and he chose part of the Sermon on the Mount because he could find no verses that were shorter. At the end of half an hour, Tom had a vague general idea of his lesson, but no more, for his mind was traversing the whole field of human thought, and his hands were busy with distracting recreations. Mary took his book to hear him recite, and he tried to find his way through the fog. Blessed are the poor. Yes, poor. Blessed are the poor in spirit. In spirit, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for I don't know what that is. Shall. Oh, shall mourn. Blessed are they shall mourn, for they shall what? Why don't you tell me, Mary? What do you want to be so mean for? Oh, Tom, you poor thick-headed thing. I'm not teasing you. I wouldn't do that. You must go and learn it again. Don't be discouraged, Tom. You'll manage it. And if you do, I'll give you something ever so nice. Now, there. That's a good boy. Oh, right. What is it, Mary? Tell me what it is. Never you mind, Tom. You know, if I say it's nice, it is nice. You bet that's so, Mary. All right. I'll tackle it again. And he did tackle it again. And under the double pressure of curiosity and prospective gain, he did it with such spirit that he accomplished a shining success. Mary gave him a brand new Barlow knife worth 12.5 cents, and the convulsion of delight that swept his system shook him to its foundations. True, the knife would not cut anything, but it was sure enough Barlow, and there was inconceivable grandeur in that. Though where the Western boys ever got the idea that such a weapon could possibly be counterfeited to its injury is an imposing mystery and will always remain so. Perhaps Tom contrived to scarify the cupboard with it, and was arranged to begin on the bureau when he was called off to dress for Sunday school. Mary gave him a tin basin of water and a piece of soap, and he went outside the door and set the basin on a little bench there. Then he dipped the soap in the water and laid it down. He turned up his sleeve, poured out the water in the ground gently, then entered the kitchen and began to wipe his face, diligently on the towel behind the door. But Mary removed the towel and said, "Now ain't you ashamed, Tom? You mustn't be so bad. Water won't hurt you." Tom was a little disconcerted. The basin was refilled, and this time he stood over it a little while gathering resolution, took in a big breath, and began. When he entered the kitchen presently, with both eyes shut and groping for the towel with his hands, an audible testimony of suds and water was dripping from his face. But when he emerged from the towel, he was not yet satisfactory, for the clean territory stopped short at his chin and jaws like a mask. Below, beyond this line, was a dark expanse of irrigated soil that spread downward and front and backward around his neck. Mary took him in hand, and when she was done with him, he was a man and a brother, and without distinction of color, his saturated hair was neatly brushed, and his short curls wrought into a dainty and symmetrical general effect. He privately smoothed out the curls with labor and difficulty, and plastered his hair close down to his head, for he had curls to be effeminate, and his own filled its life with bitterness. Then Mary got out a suit of his clothing that had been used only on Sundays during the 2 years. They were simply called his other clothes, and so by that we know the size of his wardrobe. The girl put him to rights. After he dressed himself, she buttoned his neat roundabout up to his chin, turned his vast shirt collar down over his shoulders, brushed him off, crowned him with his speckled straw hat. Now he looked exceedingly improved and uncomfortable. He was fully as uncomfortable as he looked, for there was a restraint about the whole clothes and cleanliness that galled him. Uh, he hoped that Mary would forget his shoes, but the hope was blighted, and she coated them thoroughly with tallow, as was the custom, and brought them out. He lost his temper and said he was always being made to do everything he didn't want to do. But Mary said pervasively, "Please, Tom, that's a good boy." So he got into his shoes snarling. Mary was soon ready, and the three children set out for Sunday school, a place that Tom hated with his whole heart. But Sid and Mary were fond of it. Sabbath school hours were from 9 to half past 10. Then the church service. Two of the children always remained for the sermon voluntarily, and others always remained too, for stronger reasons. The church's high backed, uncushioned pews would seat about 300 people. The edifice was small, but plain affair, with a sort of pine borer tree box on top of it for a steeple. At the door, Tom brought back a step and accosted Sunday dress comrade. "Say, Billy, you got a yeller ticket?" "Yes." "What do you take for her?" "What do you give?" "A piece of licorice and a fish hook. Let's see 'em." Tom exhibited. They were satisfactory, and the property changed hands. Then Tom traded a couple of white alleys for 3 red tickets and a small trifle or other for a couple of blue ones. He waited out the boys as they came and went on buying tickets of various colors, 10 or 15 minutes longer. He entered the church now with a swarm of clean and noisy boys and girls, proceeded to a seat, and started a quarrel with the first boy that came handy. The teacher, a grave elderly man, interfered, then turned his back a moment, and Tom pulled a boy's hair on the next bench, and was absorbing his book when the boy turned around, stuck a pin in another boy, presently in order to help him say, "Ouch!" And he got a new reprimand from the teacher. Tom's whole class were a pattern, restless, noisy, and troublesome. When they came to recite their lesson, not one of them knew his verses perfectly, but had been prompted all along. However, they worried through, and each got his reward, and small blue tickets, each with a passage of scripture on it. Each blue ticket was pay for 2 verses of the recitation. 10 blue tickets equal 1 red one, and could be exchanged for it. 10 red tickets equaled a yellow one. For 10 yellow tickets, the superintendent gave a very plainly bound Bible, worth 40 cents in those easy times, to the pupil. How many of my readers would have the industry and application to memorize 2,000 verses, even for a door Bible? And yet Mary had acquired 2 Bibles in this way. It was the patient work of 2 years, and a boy of German parentage had won 4 or 5. He once recited 3,000 verses without stopping, but the strain upon his mental faculties was too great, and he was little better than an idiot from that day forth, a grievous misfortune to the school. For on great occasions before company, the superintendent, as Tom expressed it, had always made this boy come out and spread himself. Only the older pupils managed to keep their tickets and stick to the tedious work long enough to get a Bible. And so delivering one of these prizes was a rare and noteworthy circumstance. The successful pupil was so great and conspicuous from that day on The spot of every scholar's heart was fired up with a fresh ambition that often lasted a couple of weeks. It was possible that Tom's mental stomach never really hungered for one of those prizes, but unquestionably his entire being had for many a day longed for the glory and the lot that came with it. In due course, the superintendent stood up in front of the pulpit with a closed hymn book in his hand and his forefinger inserted between his leaves, and commanded attention. When a Sunday school superintendent makes his customary little speech, a hymn book in the hand is as necessary as is the inevitable sheet of music in the hand of a singer who stands forward on the platform and sings a solo at a concert. Though why, it is a mystery, for neither the hymn book nor the sheet of music is ever referred to by the sufferer. This superintendent was a slim creature of 35, with a sandy goatee and short sandy hair. He wore a stiff sandy collar whose upper edge almost reached his ears, and whose sharp points curved forward abreast the corners of his mouth, a fence that compelled a straight outlook ahead, and a turning of the whole body when a side view was required. His chin was propped on a spreading cravat, which was as broad and long as a banknote, and had fringed ends. His boot toes were turned up sharply in the fashion of the day, like sleigh runners, an effect patiently and laboriously processed by the young men by sitting with their toes pressed against the wall for hours together. Mr. Walden was very earnest of mien and very sincere and honest at heart, and he held sacred things and places in such reverence and separated them from worldly matters that unconsciously to himself his Sunday school voice had acquired a particular intonation which was wholly absent on weekdays. He began after this fashion: "Now, children, I want you to all sit up straight just and pretty as you can, and give me all your attention for a minute or two. There, that's it. That is the way good boys and girls should do. I see one little girl is looking out the window. I'm afraid she thinks I am out there somewhere, perhaps in one of the trees, making a speech to the little birds. Ha 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 ha. I want to tell you how good it makes me feel to see many bright, clean little faces assembled in a place like this, learning to do right and be good, and so forth and so on. It is not necessary to set down the rest of the oration. It was a pattern which does not vary, and so is familiar to us all. The latter third of the speech was marked by the resumption of fights and other recreations among certain of the bad boys, fidgetings and whisperings that extended far and wide, washing even to the basics of isolation and incorruptible rocks like Sid and Mary. But every sound ceased suddenly, with the subsistence of Mr. Walter's voice, and the conclusion of the speech was received with a burst of silent gratitude. A good part of the whispering had been occasional about an event which was more or less rare: the entrance of visitors. Lawyer Thatcher, accompanied by a very feeble and aged man, a fine, portly, middle-aged gentleman with iron gray hair, and a dignified lady who was doubtless the latter's wife. The lady was leading a child. Tom had been restless and full of chafings and repentings, conscience smitten too. He could not meet Amy Lawrence's eye. He could not brook her loving gaze. But when he saw this full newcomer, his soul was all ablaze and bliss in a moment. The next moment he was showing off with all his might, cuffing boys, pulling hair, making faces, in a word, using every art, seemed like to fascinate a girl and win her applause. His exultation had one alibi: the memory of his humiliation in his angel's garden, and that record in sand was washing out under the waves of happiness that were sweeping over it now. The visitors were given the high seat of honor, and as soon as Mr. Walter's speech was finished, he introduced them to the school. The middle-aged man turned out to be a prodigious personage, no less than one of the country judge. Altogether, the most august creation his children ever looked upon, and they wondered what kind of material it was made of. And they half wanted to hear him roar, and were half afraid he might too. He is from Constantinople, 12 miles away, so he had traveled and seen the world. Those very eyes had looked upon the county courthouse, which is said to have a tin roof. The awe which these reflections inspired was attested by the impressive silence and the ranks of staring eyes. This was the great Judge Thatcher, brother of their own lawyer, Jeff Thatcher. Immediately went forward to be familiar with the great man and be envied by the school. It would have been music to his soul to hear the whispering. Look at him, Jim. He's going up there. Say, look, he's going to shake hands with him. He is shaking hands with him. By jingles, don't you wish you was Jeff? Mr. Mr. Walters fell to showing off with all sorts of official bustlings and activities, giving orders, delivering judgments, discharging directions here and there and everywhere that he could find a target. The librarian showed off, running hither and thither with his arms full of books, and making a deal of sputter and fuss that insect authority delights in. The young lady teachers showed off, bending sweetly over pupils that were lately being boxed, lifting pretty warning fingers at bad little boys and patting good ones lovingly. The young gentlemen teachers showed off with small quotings and other little displays of authority and fine attention to discipline. And most of the teachers of both sexes found business up at the library by the pulpit. It was business that frequently had to be done over again 2 or 3 times, which must seem vexation. The little girls showed off in various ways, and the little boys showed off with such feeling the air was thick with paper wads and the murmur of scufflings. And above all, the great man sat and beamed a majestic social smile upon all the house, and warmed himself in the sun of his own grandeur, for he was showing off too. There was only one thing wanting to make Mr. Walters' yesterday complete. That was a chance to deliver a Bible prize and exhibit a prodigy. Several pupils had a few yellow tickets, but none had enough. Hit around among sore pupils inquiring. He would have given worlds now to have that German lad back again with a sound mind. And now at this moment, when hope was dead, Tom Sawyer came forward with 9 yellow tickets, 9 red tickets, and 10 blue ones, and demanded a Bible. This was a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. Walters was not expecting an application from this sort for the next 10 years, but there was no getting around it. Here were the certified checks. They were good for their face. Tom was therefore elevated to a place within the judge and the other elect, and the great news announced from headquarters. It was the most stunning surprise of the decade, and so profound was the sensation that it lifted the new Hebrew up to judicial one's attitude, and the school had 2 marvels to gaze upon in place of one. The boys were all eaten up with envy, but those that suffered the bitterest pangs were those who perceived too late that they themselves had contributed to this hated splendor by trading tickets to Tom for the wealth he had amassed in selling whitewashed privileges. These espied themselves as being the dupes of a willy fraud, a gullible snake in the grass. The prize was delivered to Tom with as much effusion as the superintendent could pump up under the circumstances. It lacked somewhat of the two gush, for the poor fellow's instinct shot him. There was a mystery here that could not well bear the light. Perhaps it was simply preposterous that this boy had warehoused 2,000 sheaves, a skipper window on his premises. A dozen would strain his capacity, without a doubt. Amy Lawrence was proud and glad, and she tried to make Tom see it in her face, but he wouldn't look. She just wondered then. She was just a grain tubble next to dim suspicion came and went, came again. She watched. A furtive glance told her worlds, and then her heart broke, and she was jealous and angry, and the tears came, and she hated everybody. Tom most of all, she thought. Tom was introduced to the judge, but his tongue was tied. His breath would hardly come. His heart quaked, partly because of the awful greatness of man, and mainly because he was her parent. He would like to fall down and worship him, as if it was in the dark. The judge put his hand on Tom's head and called him a fine little man and asked him what his name was. The boy stammered, gasped, and got a Tom. Oh, no, not Tom. It's Thomas. That's it. I thought there was more to it, baby. That's very well. But you're another one, I dare say. And you tell it me, will you? Tell the gentleman your other name, Thomas, said Walters, and say, sir. You mustn't forget your manners. Thomas Sawyer, sir. That's it. That's a good boy. Fine, manly little fella. 2,000 verses, a great many. Very, very great many. And you never can be sorry for the trouble you took to learn them. For knowledge is worth more than anything else in the world. For what makes great man and good man, you'll be a great man or a good man yourself some day, Thomas. Then you look back and say, it's all owing to the precious Sunday school privileges of my boyhood. It's all owing to the good superintendent who encouraged me and watched over me and gave me a beautiful Bible, a splendid little elegant Bible to keep and have it all for my own, always. It's all owing to brighten up. That is what you say, Thomas, and you wouldn't take any money for those 2,000 verses. No, indeed, you wouldn't. And you mind telling me, this little lady, some of the things you learned? No, I know you wouldn't. For we are proud of little boys to learn. Now, no doubt you know the names of all the 12 disciples. Won't you tell us the name of the first two? What appointed? Tom was tugging at a buttonhole and looking sheepish. He blushed now and his eyes fell. Mr. Walter's heart sank within him. He said to himself, it's not possible the boy can answer the simplest question. Why did the judge ask him, yet he obligated to speak up. Answer the gentleman, Thomas. Don't be afraid. Tom still hung free. Now I know you'll tell me, said the lady. The names of the first two sides were David and Goliath. Let us draw the curtain of clarity of the rest of the scene. Well, at least he got 2 men. He could have gotten